Yo, hey, this shit easy, nigga. Hey, all I'm talking about, nigga, I'm still out here trying to get it.
Contender Regime Boxing checking back in with y'all, man. What's happening? First and foremost, I want to start out by saying that I fuck with Gary Russell Jr., fuck with Terence Crawford, both heavy, two of my favorite fighters and favorite guys to watch. And I understand this talk is very juicy right now. It's entertaining, it's drama. You know, people love controversy and shit like that. You know, these two fighters obviously have some type of history. It's been put out there that I don't know who mentioned this whole thing first, who dug this up from the past first. From my understanding, Gary Russell, you know, mentioned that he broke Terence Crawford's jaw. You know, they had a little altercation back in 2008, I believe. This is a while ago. You know, these guys were teenagers. You know, at least I know Terence Crawford, he said he was 18. And Gary Russell probably was like 19, 20, something like that. You know, they was fighting in amateurs, Olympics and shit like that, right? So, as far as, you know, Terence Crawford, he fired back and, you know, basically said that, you know, you snuck me and it was a cheap shot and, you know, I got sent home because they were afraid of what I was going to do to you. Gary Russell was like, that's not true. You had a chance to, you know, fire back on me, but you folded and all this. You know, all that shit sound fun. That sound cool, but it's really pointless at this point in time because, you know, these guys are 4 weight divisions apart from each other. You know, as much as Gary Russell Jr. say, hey, man, you know, shit, we could fight. I'll come up to 147. We know that shit ain't happening. We know Gary Russell Jr. not going to fight at welterweight. You know what I'm saying? And honestly, I mean, because they got this history, would I mind seeing a fight? I wouldn't mind, you know, because I know, and we got to keep things into perspective because I know that Terence Crawford don't have anybody to fight. And I know if he don't fight Gary Russell, if he don't fight, you know, Sean Porter, if he don't fight Keith Thurman, like he's not going to fight a top fighter. So why not fight Gary Russell Jr.? But is this a fight that I think can possibly happen? No, it does not make sense at all. I know Gary Russell Jr. is, you know, he got a tough mindset. He claims to be this tough guy and all these things. And he very well may be that tough guy. But quite honestly, man, you know, like I said, this fight, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. All this shit going on now is just talk. You know what I'm saying? It's never going to happen. And it's just kind of odd to me that Gary Russell is, you know, just going so crazy at Terence Crawford when you got guys that you can fight. You know, I don't think that Devin Haney is avoiding Gary Russell Jr. I don't believe that, you know, Tank Davis is avoiding Gary Russell Jr. I don't believe those things, you know. And let's say Tank is avoiding Gary Russell. Let's say, you know, Shakur Stevenson is avoiding Gary Russell. Let's say Devin Haney avoiding Gary Russell Jr. Let's just say, we know Leo Santa Cruz don't want no smoke with Gary Russell Jr. But just giving him the benefit of the doubt, let's say the top fighters in and around his division are avoiding him. Gary Russell should be fighting multiple times a year, just beating up on everybody. I mean, you should be putting so much pressure on these guys, you know, fighting these lower tier guys and just wreaking havoc to the point to where it's just undeniable. Like, motherfuckers gotta see you. You know what I'm saying? Like, you fucking, like, your record should be 30-something, 40-something and 0 right now. Like, you should be 40-something and 0 right now, just off of the strength of you beating up on these bums that, you know, that you claim are beneath you or not on your level. You know what I'm saying? But yet you only fighting once a year. And sometimes we don't even see Gary Russell Jr. the whole year. You know, so it's just kind of odd to me that he coming at Terence Crawford, you know, so vigorously, but he not fighting. You know what I'm saying? And if this fight did happen, man, I just don't see any way that Gary Russell Jr. can beat Terence Crawford. I think at 147, Terence Crawford would beat the living hell out of Gary Russell Jr. You know what I'm saying? All this big and bad talk that Gary Russell talked, man, I didn't see that against Lomachenko. I ain't see that. You know, Lomachenko won the fight, and it wasn't like no, you know, he didn't just dog out Gary Russell Jr., but Gary Russell didn't go in there and show me this gangster. He didn't show me this big gangster, this big speaker. You know what I'm saying? Like this big guy, you know, that's gonna fuck everything up, you know, kill everything moving. I didn't see that in Gary Russell Jr. when he fought Vasyl Lomachenko. I saw a decent fighter. You know what I'm saying? Somebody that, you know, slightly above average. I didn't see just no killer. I'm just being honest. So if you get in there with Terence Crawford at 147, bro, you gonna get mauled. You gonna get beat bad. And Terence Crawford ain't gonna get no credit for it. You know what I'm saying? Now, the flip side to that is Terence Crawford gonna fight a bum anyway. I don't like to call these guys bums. But let's say he gonna fight a lower tier guy anyway. So from that perspective, I can say, okay, why not fight Gary Russell Jr.? But bruh, it's like Terence Crawford would beat the brakes off of Gary Russell Jr., man. Like that shit wouldn't even be fun to watch from a competitive standpoint. It's gonna be fun just because they got beef. You know, it's a story behind it. But it ain't gonna be fun to watch from a boxing standpoint. It's gonna be an ass whooping. Come on, man. Gary Russell Jr. ain't gonna be able to land shit on Terence Crawford. I just don't see it, man. He's too small. He doesn't have anything other than the hand speed, anything special to me that stands out. You know what I'm saying? That tells me he can take his talents up 4 weight divisions. I don't see that. Gary Russell Jr. to me is not a pound for pound fighter. He's a very, very good fighter, very, very, you know, talented fighter, but he's not a pound for pound caliber type of guy to me. I could be wrong. Some people may disagree. That's cool. We all can, at Contender Regime Boxing, we all can have our own opinion here. You know, but just cut the bullshit out, man. You know, I'm sorry to spoil the fun for y'all. You know, I know that matchup is tantalizing right now with all this shit going on, but Gary Russell Jr. will never fight Terence Crawford. It's not going to happen unless they do a sparring match on Facebook, Facebook Live like Sean Porter did with old boy. You know what I'm saying? That's the only way I see them getting in the ring. They can do a sparring match on Facebook Live and run it up. You know what I'm saying? But y'all let me know what y'all think about this whole fiasco, man. Do y'all, you know, what are y'all thoughts on the drama in itself? And do you actually believe that Gary Russell Jr. can compete with Terence Crawford in a real fight? Y'all let me know what y'all think down in the comments, man. Contender Regime Boxing, I'll holler at y'all boys, man.